This is the DRF Players Podcast. Here are your hosts, Peter Thomas Fornatel and Jonathan Kinchin.
Hello and welcome to the DRF Players Podcast. This is show 332, the May 2nd, 2018 edition, our Kentucky Oaks show for 2018. We have a special crew assembled for you, only partially assembled at the moment, but should be fully assembled shortly. Before I talk about them, I'm going to bring in my co-host. You know him as the People's Champion. He's Jonathan Kinchin. JK, what's up, my friend?
Hello, PTF. It's Derby week. I'm excited. I got an airplane in my near future, and I'll be in the great state of Kentucky in no time.
Excellent. Another in a series of travel days for JK. How many derbies is this for you now? Do you know the number off the top of your head?
I believe this is number 9. I keep on wanting to say it's number 10, but I think it is number 9. Mind That Bird was my first one. If we do the math, I believe that gets me to land on number 9.
Yeah, I think that would be 9. JK tries math, succeeds, I think. So no bingo squares there. We're going to have 2 special guests, hopefully. We have one on the line now, so we'll start with him. He is one of the most respected handicappers going, a must-follow on Twitter, if you don't already, at NTAM, T-A-M-M, 1215. I'm talking about Beyer Speed Figure Team member Nick Tammaro. Nick, how are you today?
Good morning, Pete and Jonathan. I'm great, and I feel like the most important reason why I'm on the show is to let Jonathan know that if Mind That Bird was his first, then this is his 10th Derby.
So it is JK tries math fails, bingo square for all, and I'll put some money in the mistake jar to give out another bingo square and to thank you for coming up with that fact, Nick. Unbelievable.
I'm struggling over here trying to do the counting with my hands. Okay, thank you, Nick.
You didn't have to get to the toes.
No problem.
Anyway.
Look, exactly. I had to keep you on your toes. Like Uncle Junior told Tony in the episode when he came in and wanted to talk to him, he said, next time you come in heavy or you don't come in at all.
Fantastic. Planet Texas, very well represented on today's show, at least for the time being, the two of you in the great state of Texas. Nick, how many derbies have you been to, or have you been to the Derby yet at this point?
This will be my 4th. I'm heading over tonight. My first one was our friend Travis Stone's first one in 2015, so I'm on 4 in a row. And I did. Those of you that know how much I vacillate about every decision know that I said for quite some time that I wasn't going to go this year, and then had an epiphany flying home on a work trip about 6 weeks ago or so, and thought, how the hell am I not going to go? So decided to go, and I'm looking forward to it. It should be it's a hell of a time. It's amazing the number of people I talk to about going that say to me it's a bucket list event for them, and for people like us that have been so many times, I think we take it for granted because it really is something special for a lot of the people who will be there.
I do need to get back. Plan A was to go this year. My mom has always wanted to go. Her dad, my grandfather, worked for Seagram's, and so it basically had a business reason to go every year. Four Roses was one of the brands he worked with as sort of like a marketing liaison. So, tough work assignment, got to go to the Derby every year. She never got to go, always wanted to go. Perrin, I think, is old enough to appreciate it. There was just too much other travel this year, but I think plan A, anyway, is to get there for 2019, even if it means missing out on some of the other fun spring travel that I've come to appreciate. And I realized while talking with Steve Bick just about an hour ago, a little over an hour ago, that my first Derby, 1998, 20 years ago today, real quiet, and was just remembering that experience with Steve, and it really is something that all horse players should make sure to get to. What was it for you, Nick, that tipped the scales in favor of going this year? Did it have to do with the strength of the race, or just the opportunity to watch the race from the announcer's booth and high-five Travis when it's done?
I think both. I would be remiss in not admitting both. I won't, my hope is that Travis calls many, many derbies, of course, and so I'll always have the access that I do, and we'll use him in that respect. But I want to take advantage of it while I can, and so I just don't know how you're going to get a much better setup than that, especially given that since he lives there, I can stay with him, and so that kind of streamlines the cost a little bit more. I'll probably be one of the only people there that will have not paid for lodging or seating in any way, shape, or form, other than maybe people in media. So yeah, I couldn't ignore that. Had to go ahead and take the plunge. And I'll say historically, since you brought up that your first was real quiet, so 26 years ago to the day was my first communion, which was May 2nd, '92, and that was Little E.T. And the funny thing was at our after party, one of the guys in attendance we had watched the Breeders' Cup the year before, together at Trinity Meadows. And so he came up. We lived in Dallas at the time. So he came up and we had a party in a hotel suite, and then we went to dinner at the Palm, blah, blah, blah. So we were watching the Derby, and he called our friend who was a bookmaker, and he bet a couple thousand to win on Arazi because he thought Arazi was a complete cinch. And we tried to stop him, but it didn't happen, and so it was not. The party took a little bit of a turn for the worse. So then we had to rally afterwards.
That's pretty funny.
Yeah, it is. You know, every Derby has its own character and characters, of course, and there's always something about it that you'll remember. So I'm sure there will be quite a few memories made in this one.
We're gonna save our handicapping thoughts on this year's Derby. We will get to those towards the end of the show. We're waiting for the fourth member of our team, who appears to have double booked himself, Paul Matisse. Will hopefully be joining us a little bit later in the hour. But I think we should just go ahead and begin with our look into the Kentucky Oaks Day card. And, Paul will join us when he joins us. We'll go through Oaks Day, and then there'll be time left, and we can answer some questions, hopefully, and also do a quick look ahead to the Derby. JK, you're a veteran now, as we know, 10 Derbies. What is your approach to Oaks Day? Are you a get there at 10 in the morning and post up guy, or do you roll in for the stakes?
Yeah, no, I roll in for the stakes. It's a long day, and it's not just a long day, but the next day is even longer. And so if you overexert yourself in the first quarter of a mile, you might set it up for the closer. So I try to take it easy on Oaks Day. I don't get there till the stakes. So, but I enjoy Oaks Day. I've never really had a great Oaks Day. I guess the only claim to fame I've ever had on Oaks Day was the American Pharoah year, where I played a double with the Larry Jones horse, the number 7 horse. Nick, who am I talking about?
Lovely Maria.
Lovely Maria. I used Lovely Maria to Pharoah, so that started the weekend off good. That was a fun trip, but I usually don't do well on the Oaks. I don't think I've had an Oaks winner, probably Lovely Maria, and then before that it was probably Rachel Alexandra.
Yeah, going back a bit in time there. So take it easy for you. You keep the vodka sodas into the single digits. Is that what that means? Only two servings of ice cream?
No. I do all of those things. I just keep the powder. I try to keep the powder dry, but sometimes there's a threshold when I have too many vodkas. I get a little loose. Paradise Woods last year took a dent out of the Derby bankroll.
Yes. I was in that. I was on that team as well, JK. Let's start then by going ahead to race 5, the 8 Bells, and talking about this one for a minute. Have you had a chance to have a look at this race? Haven't you, JK?
Yep, absolutely.
Where did you? Is it? Well, let me start with this. Is it a race you figure to be betting?
Yes. Yeah. No. I'd like to get involved. I'm not really sure multi-race wise. I guess they don't have an early pick 5, so I thought the pick 5 was going to end there, but that doesn't exist. So I guess I'm not really sure what it starts or finishes. It looks like it
starts the pick 3. There's a pick 3, and there's a double, and then the vertical.
That ends in that turf sprint. So that's not exciting. Look, I'm going to try to beat Gas Station Sushi. As funny as the name is, I think Talk Voob to me is the one I'm going to try to build the first part of my day around. I made a joke today. That Nick will appreciate, that I'm going to sprint into the racetrack and try to play an ice-cold pick 3 here, starting with Talk Voob to me.
A reference to your Derby day, nearly didn't get on the bet, sleeping a little too late from 2015, I think that is. What do you think, Nick? Is he on to something with Talk Voob to me? Is he underrating Gas Station Sushi? What's your approach to this race?
I thought the Gas Station Sushi's last was good. I can say that, of course, with all due respect to the figure maker, I think the Beaumont figure was a tricky one to make because the about 7 furlongs is a distance that was very seldom used. during the meet. In fact, I think this might have been the only one run at the distance. So it's a little difficult to say whether she actually got a 79. I think it's one that's probably a little bit adjustable, and so of course open to interpretation. She was good in that race. I thought all things considered, she got a pretty decent setup. Thought the pace was solid. Thought Kelly Humer also made up a lot of ground because things were a little bit contested on the front end. I was at Oaklawn when Mia Mischief won the Purple Martin, and this is a horse who had shown some real ability prior to that, and I think that a lot of people felt like the bloom was off the rose when she was beaten by Amy's Challenge earlier in the Oaklawn meet. But I'll tell you what, she rated very effectively that day. She looked very, very good, and I think she's the horse to beat. I don't know if she'll go off favored. I think she was made the morning line. I think if Amy's Challenge is ridden aggressively from the rail, which I think is really the only option other than them trying to let somebody else go and get outside, then that'll put Mia Mischief in a really comfortable spot. I could understand somebody making the argument that the pace will be quick enough to set up for Gas Station Sushi. I don't think that a quality speed horse like Mia Mischief will be compromised. So I'm kind of expecting her to win. And this is the third leg of a pick 5, actually. There's a pick 4 on the second, there's a pick 5 on the third, there's a pick 4 on the fourth, and then there's a pick 5 in the seventh and the ninth. So there's definitely a cornucopia of wagering options, you could say. So yeah, that's where I'll go. Not a huge opinion. I respect Talk Vuv to me, who came back off the layoff and ran really well. I thought she kind of set a slow pace that day, so that was my skepticism. But she seems like one of the short list of win candidates.
Looking at the late speed in this race, the come home times essentially, a lot of the speedy ones don't finish particularly quickly. My thought in the race was maybe to try to hold her tight, the number 7 for Larry Jones, somewhere up into the number, and I wouldn't rule out the idea she could win. Do you give her any count at all, Nick?
I don't think she's without chance. I think she's an improving horse. Obviously came back off the brief break with a good effort. That was a race that kind of set up for somebody with her style, and you know what? This might be a race that sets up for somebody with her style. So there's also, I think, a question of whether you believe maybe that Mia Mischief is a little bit better going shorter. The one thing I would say about that is don't use the Spendthrift race last year against her. She was a 3-year-old filly, obviously, at the time, coming back relatively quick, who really set a very, very strong pace. That 45-3 is not indicative of how fast that pace was. So I think that if you're looking at maybe a redesigned Mia Mischief who's comfortable rating and who can maybe turn herself off a little bit early, that should make the difference. There's one thing that's absolute to me in this race. There are 2 races on Mia Mischief's past performances that if she runs, there's virtually no chance she can be beaten, and nobody else really has that. Can you say that for anyone else?
JK, any final thoughts on the 8 bells before we turn the page to La Troyenne?
No, I agree. I think those are the 2 horses that can probably win the situation. I don't like Amy's Challenge, who it feels like they've probably been trying to get her to stretch out so that she could go on the trail, and now suddenly drawing the rail, maybe she flow away there and then trouble in that. Obviously, they would need to sit her to give her best shot. I'm going to her. I'm going to Gas Station. And I'm just to use Mia Mischief and Talk Vuv with me.
It makes Amy's a lot of talk. Will they want when it came to raw time? Eventually, they decided on the spot instead. But that's a point about the draw not necessarily working out the way would have wanted. Let's go on to race 6, the La Troyenne, and okay, we'll keep with you.
I guess the tricky part is there's a lot of cross entries here. It's Salty and maybe are both in on Saturday in the Humana Distaff, so it'll be interesting to see what happens there. Those 2, I mean, Martin Glass has been pretty. The last 2 races were pretty impressive. The one at Oakland and at Gulfstream, I think it'll be probably a little with some of the teams in here with Eddie Bell for pleasure and able to after it, and Farrell always seems to take her fair share, not including the last race and the Apple Blossom, but then and Salty as well will also take some money. I'm going to try to hook up a little bit of Ivy Bell. I think Abel Tasman's good races is too good for these. She seems to be working well. Keep an eye out on how she runs. It could be a little bit of a foreshadowing on how Rye is going to run, working with her 2 back. So Abel Tasman for me is obvious use. Martini Glass, I think, presents some value. And then Ivy Bell is a type that I'm going to try to key if she happens to run in this spot.
Abel Tasman, Mike Smith on her, has shown the ability in the past to be aggressive at the earlier stages in races. It would seem, just looking at how this plays out on paper, even if it does hold together, that type of strategy may be needed again. How do you view Abel Tasman, Nick? In your horizontals, how much of your play do you see running through her?
Probably the majority of it. She's better than these horses, and even off the layoff, I don't really know how much it's going to matter. So it'll be really a matter of just the move being timed properly. We did see kind of some of these wonky middle moves that were made in the Coaching Club American Oaks and the Cotillion. She's more of a traditional one-run type of off-the-pace horse that needs to be allowed to settle, and it feels like with an honest pace expected in here, that'll happen. I mean, just guessing, I kind of expect Salty and Ivy Bell to both go on Saturday. I don't know, I don't really think either of them have particularly huge chances of winning either day, but I don't really see how Ivy Bell can win this race going long, but maybe that's what they wanted to try when she was purchased. So I thought that she ran well last time. A Gulfstream seems to be coming into the race the right way. I thought there was one kind of goofy price horse that you could maybe try was Apology Not Accepted, who's run 2 sneaky good races at Churchill and is probably going to get that stalking trip right outside of Farrell. Farrell has also had some issues at the gate a couple of times, and maybe that could help Apology Not Accepted get out and set the pace. I thought she set a pretty strong pace in the Double Dog Dare last time and was still battling all the way to the wire. She's coming back pretty quickly, but I think that might be a sign of some level of confidence. She's probably not good enough to win, but I could envision myself maybe playing one cold number of Abel Tasman over her. I'll probably play Martini Glass just a bit as well because she seems to be one that can ship anywhere and do her thing. And had run a good race. She ran a good race in the Houston Ladies Classic on the worst part of the track, being down on the inside, and has now come back with 2 pretty big efforts. It was smart of Keith Nations to pass the Apple Blossom and come here. Of course, he was feared Unique Bella, and given the way that race unfolded, she probably would have had a pretty good chance. But nonetheless, she's a major player, I think, and I don't know how much contention for the win end runs deeper than that. I think that ultimately Martini Glass or Abel Tasman will get the job done, and I'm just going to try and squeeze Apology Not Accepted in there somewhere.
I like that idea, Nick, as a sneaky, you don't spend too much, but you cover one scenario where Abel Tasman is too far back and Apology Not Accepted could be best of speed coming out of that Double Dog Dare and the pace in there. What about you with this race, JK, from pace point of view? Are you interested at all in trying to do something with a horse that you think could be the best of speed, or do you feel like it's not going to be necessary given the aggressiveness Smith has shown on Abel Tasman in the past?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's going to be definitely dependent on, like Nick said, what happens with Salty and or Ivy Bell. Salty being drawn down inside with maybe only kind of one way to go, and that's a little bit forward just to get position. Ivy Bell stretching out for the first time, obviously a Todd Pletcher type that would be forwardly placed. Apology Not Accepted makes a ton of sense that those horses happen to fall out. Suddenly she could end up loose.
Interesting idea for sure. I just received word we may be joined by Paul Matisse in short order, but I don't think he's here quite yet. So let's go ahead and move on to this turf sprint. Or was that, did I just hear something? No, apparently not. Hearing things on the DRF Players podcast. Let's move on to the turf sprint. Since you specifically said you weren't that interested in the race, JK, I'm going to punish you by making you go first here.
Yeah, no, it's not that I'm not interested in it. It's just I prefer to end in something a little bit more formful or easy to predict. I really actually don't hate the race. I think there's 2 horses that are probably live here. I like Leighton Revenge with the super fast pace last time in the Shakertown on soft ground going 5.5. Now cuts back to 5. If you look back in this one's form, was at 23-1 was just nailed with a big figure in this race last year. So I look for Leighton Revenge to be dangerous on the cut back from 5.5 to 5. And then Vision Perfect for Jason Service, who's the one of the best turf sprint trainers I think out there. Vision Perfect ran a huge race last time down at Gulfstream and going 5. I think he'll be extremely difficult in here. I've said it a lot. I don't like closers in turf sprints, and I especially don't like it when they're going 5. Give me the horses that are going to be forward, and I'll hold my breath.
Is that a similar approach to what you take in these 5 furlong turf dashes, Nick? Are you all about the speed of the speed?
I'm notoriously terrible at these races, so I do think that the speed of the speed is a weakness in my game, and understanding really who can be faster. I think we've seen on numerous occasions Leighton Revenge is pretty much faster than any horse he'll ever run into. So I think that you can safely say that he'll be on the lead here, and I mean he came out of the gate in his last race like he had been shot out of a cannon. He was 2 lengths in front of that field in probably 70 yards. So, and that was not a circumstance where you probably wanted to be. I think wiring that field was always going to be pretty tough, and so getting back to 5/8 is obviously going to help him quite a bit. As Jonathan alluded to, he looked like the winner of this race when they turned for home on Oaks Day last year, and even with a little bit of a forecast for rain, I don't see how the course could be anywhere near as soft. So he seems to be able to handle pretty much any kind of footing. The Vision Perfect conversation deals with, this question we ask ourselves every spring, which is horses that have explosive performances in Florida, are they going to take appreciable steps forward when they move out of Florida? Jason Service seems to win turf sprints everywhere. He's only run 3 horses in Kentucky in the last 5 years, so it's just a circuit that he's not really been that active on. I really don't think that should matter when push comes to shove, and I think this horse is clearly, I would say, the horse to beat based on his last performance. Bucaro clearly benefited from being back in Kentucky. He's a horse that has been very consistent. It almost amazed me how well he ran in the Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint looking back on it. So I think being drawn outside, he'll give a very good account of himself and should be very dangerous as well. It's probably a race where I'll use those 3 main players, Latent Revenge, Vision Perfect, and Bucaro, because I just really don't see who else can win. I don't have a particularly good opinion on the race, and I want to be covered in the event that somebody gets loose and keeps going, because in my opinion that would really only be Latent Revenge.
All right, I like the way you're seeing that, and I appreciate the proper Italian pronunciation of Bucaro as well. All right, I've heard a rumor that Paul Matisse is with us. Is this the case? Paul, are you out there?
I'm here,
awesome.
Pete. Sorry for the delay. So
not a problem at all. We know how these things happen.
If you're going over 5 furlong turf sprint races, probably everybody's better off for that I wasn't on the call. So.
I was going to give you a chance to weigh in on this turf sprint, but it sounds like you might just appreciate zipping ahead to the 8th race on the card. Is that right? Yeah.
We got to get Pay Any Prices owner involved here to talk about the 5 furlongs. You're part owner of the world record holder in the 5 furlong turf sprint, so we got to get your opinion.
And Pay Any Price actually ran against probably the 2 favorites, Vision Perfect and Bucaro. We finished in between the 2 in the race in Florida. I would agree with what Nick was saying, though. If Vision Perfect can translate that race, I don't see how he's going to lose this race. But I think they're, Vision Perfect probably got a good setup because Bucaro decided to run with us that day for whatever reason. So I guess maybe closer than the final. Didn't really have an opinion anyway. I had the idea that Will didn't like the soft race, and I thought he's a horse that could improve for what you see probably. But it's going to be a soft, and so that might be the window.
I was going to hear Nick alluded to their forecast. I know you're kind of your neurologist when it comes to ground horse racing. What is the latest forecast for Saturday?
You're being kind and only call amateur in predicting weather, but amateur in far more than that. There's a weather.gov. Everybody's got their go-to weather site, and weather.com seems to be the biggest overfeeders in the world. I think they have 120% chance of rain. And so weather.gov says lots of showers and thunderstorms before 8 hours likely, and possible thunderstorm between 2. Rainfall total a 1/10 and 1/4 of an inch. Higher amounts of thunderstorms. You should really plan some kind of slop fest, but obviously how thunderstorms come across the comps, there's always that there could be a little bit heavy. I can tell you this, it's going to be about 3 times the temperature as it was last day when it was there. I mean, for a big in the cold from Texas, it felt like it was about 15 degrees out there. It was so cold.
You used to get a wise guy horse racing advice on it. Today you get some the guy weather move, weather.com. I love it. Let's move on to the alley. And Paul, we'll get you to weigh in here. Always always fun to see this year's Derby winner competing on this week. What do you make Always Dreaming in the spot, and how do you playing the race?
I wouldn't Always Dreaming in a million years. Unless we're going to roll out the same. I guess I guess it's possible, right? If it rains, he could end up on the same sloppy track with the same bias that he had last year. Maybe. I guess that could fall in for him. I'm a little don't know where to go in this race yet because I'm not sure where Awesome Slew is going to run. Right, this weekend he's cross-entered Saturday as well. And,
yes.
I think that's who I would like. I like him in either race, whichever one he shows up in. But I think he could handle 2 turns. I think you can make the argument he's a little bit better at a mile and 2 turns. So I wouldn't be afraid of that. And I hadn't done Friday at all for a sloppy track, and that's worrying me a little bit here going over the race. But if it's not, I'd be against Always Dreaming for sure.
I mean, it certainly makes sense. You got to figure the name recognition, the hype attendant when you have the Derby winner coming back and a horse who, just looking at the form, doesn't have any form since that race. So it seems like the kind of horse that you're supposed to bet against. JK, I want you to weigh in on that, and I also want you to weigh in on Awesome Slew, since you're famous for assessing certain horses controversially when the form says something else as 1-turn horses versus 2-turn horses. Tell me your thoughts on these two and your general thoughts on this race.
Yeah, I mean, Always Dreaming is one of those tricky situations where, I want to be against him really bad, but then it's who's going to run with him and how is he not going to get a perfect trip? So that part is a little bit concerning. And he didn't run terrible last time. It wasn't ideal. He ran okay off of a break, and we'll see what if Todd has him ready to run in here. I think Awesome Slew's fine. I think he's just a good horse. I've tried to beat that horse a ton of times, and every time that you see a 1 in his PPs, I can assure you that he beat me. I wasn't there. So I think Awesome Slew's fine. He makes a lot of sense. It feels like, they'll run him here because, obviously they're going to look to cut him back in 5 weeks for the Met Mile. So I would think they'll probably run him here, but maybe the weather will make the determination on that. I think I'm going to give this Chad horse a chance, see if he gets bet. Backyard Heaven. The race last time at Aqueduct was good. We all know what Chad does on the big days and when he gets rolling. And so I think this horse could be tactical enough to not let Always Dreaming get too far away and could potentially mow him down late. I love Opportunity, but I'm just going to stick to the idea that this is just too short.
He does seem like one whose grindy style is more suited by more distance. Nick, I remember you sending out a tweet about the Carter this year, and I think it was right after the race was won. Your prediction about the speed figure. What did you think of that race, and what do you think of Awesome Slew's chances and the rest here?
Yeah, I mean, it goes without saying the story of that race was Army Mule, and Awesome Slew, who seems to be a horse who frequently finds somebody who's a little bit better than him, did it again. And it's been a matter when he's been defeated, which has been 6 of his last 8 starts, that the horse that beat him was just a little bit better. And that was the case with Army Mule, who really honestly that day was quite a bit better. Army Mule was sensational and clearly is a horse that when he's right, he's very, very talented. So already looking forward to seeing him in the Met Mile if he can stay in one piece. I'm firmly in the Awesome Slew as a 1-turn horse camp. So I feel like in terms of where he's absolutely at his best, given that he's coming off of a 7-furlong race and has shown speed going 2 turns, I do think there's an interesting element to him here, potentially being somewhat forwardly placed, because outside of Always Dreaming, there's absolutely no speed in this race. And that might still not be enough for Always Dreaming to win. And like Paul, I look at him very critically, being somebody who feels as if his Kentucky Derby was very much bias-aided, and then he fell on his face afterwards. I don't really care about whatever injuries were going on at the end of the season in terms of excuses for what he had done. So it's a situation where I feel like you approach Always Dreaming and you say, gosh, I mean, he's going to get such a good trip. He's going to be so loose, and if it's wet, then he's going to benefit from it. But if you bet him and he loses, you feel like you should wear a bag over your head because, I mean, he's done nothing to indicate to us that he's a horse you should ever trust again. And so that's really where I think the distinction happens in the race. The one horse that I will at least mention that we haven't talked about yet is Good Samaritan, because I thought his New Orleans handicap was very, very good. I didn't really think he got a huge setup in there by any means. The player, obviously, unfortunately going wrong, helped. It helped Good Samaritan clearly because it lessened the competition that he had, but didn't look a half mile into that race like Good Samaritan had much of a chance to win. So Rosario's not going to he's not going to be able to let him drop all the way out and make that big run. I don't know if maybe that's just Good Samaritan's only way of going, and I do think there are probably going to be opportunities for him later in the year in races that set up a little bit better. And as Jonathan said, Backyard Heaven is still the unknown. We'll see if he runs back to his last race at all. It's a race that clearly came up fast on any measurable speed figure, so we'll see if it's quite as fast as his 108 looks, or if maybe there's going to be a bit of a regression. It's still unclear just how good some of the horses that were behind him are, and that race does stick out on their past performances too. So we'll see. He's clearly a horse with a lot of talent, and that Coppertown Backyard Heaven Stand the Man maiden race, as we've talked about on Twitter, some of the fastest maidens you'll ever find back in September, and Backyard Heaven now seems to be getting it together.
Yeah, I like that move, that middle move last time, visually arresting, and Backyard Heaven would have to be on tickets. And I agree. I don't see how it sets up for Good Samaritan, but I think I just need to use him, especially if I'm going to be, as I feel like you're supposed to be, against Always Dreaming. I don't want to lose to a horse that just ran the race that he did in the New Orleans, even if I can't really design the race for him. Before we leave this race, I want to go back to Paul, because I want him I thought it was interesting that he suggested that Awesome Slew might even be better around 2 turns than 1. Was just curious, Paul, to give you a chance to explain why you feel that way. Maybe we can learn something here.
Well, I mean, his race in the Breeders' Cup Dirt mile last year, I thought was very good. That race came up fast, finished. Like Nick was saying, and Jonathan, he doesn't win a lot, but look at the horses that beat him: Army Mule, Battle Midway, Verfang, Mind Your Biscuits. More Spirit in the Metro Mile. I mean,
Grade 1 horses.
The horses finished ahead of him. I mean, I think Good Samaritan. I agree with Nick. The Good Samaritan's and you too, Pete, that he's a okay horse, but I mean, he's not in the league of the horses that have beaten Awesome Slew. I mean, the thing that's telling about this race, looking at it again while everybody was talking, was how little pace there is. And if Awesome Slew scratches, I mean, Backyard Heaven is going to have a big advantage of being the first one by Always Dreaming, if you're against Always Dreaming. So,
and another point about Awesome Slew in that 2-turn Breeders' Cup race, he was not on the favorable part of the racetrack, suggesting that
that's what I meant.
Better than the bare form suggests. So, Be interesting to see what they decide to do with him. Now, I told you guys we were going to be talking about the stakes on the Oaks Undercard, not realizing that we were going to have this race 9 kicking off pick 5. And obviously connected to this the stakes in the late pick 3. So you can absolutely say I haven't looked at this race, Pete, you jerk. You told me we were talking about the stakes. But I did want to give y'all a chance to offer any comment up on the 9th race at Churchill Downs. We'll start with you, JK. Did you have a chance to look at this at all?
No, not really. I mean, I just kind of glanced. It's kind of an annoying situation. I really don't understand why they decided to do that. Right smack dab in the middle. Electric Forest was good last time, but he doesn't feel like he has to win, although it was a nice performance. He's
very good race.
Every time you try to beat Chad, and he's 6-5, and he wins, and so I wouldn't toss that one. And it's annoying. You just kind of have to play the race. So I thought he was interesting. When I first looked at it, Maho Bay I thought was interesting with the kind of big figure and that maiden 30. Back at Fairgrounds, could improve off of that. It's obviously a class jump here, but he ran well that day, and Adam Biscuits is obviously riding out of his mind at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see. That seemed. I trust the 82. You'd think would win the race at this level most of the time. I personally, just off visuals, trust the Electric Forest number more than I trust the one coming out of the slow-paced maiden 30. Paul, we'll go to you next in this one. Did you have a chance to have a look at it at all?
Yeah, I think it's. I had 249 upset brewing on the race where he was on the rail at Keeneland last time. Going back out of the stake races, and Enrage might be the tricky one. Had a terrible trip in his first start off the layoff, and he's got back numbers, and might be in the right place in this race too. So, but I'm not against Chad in this race, but I probably in the I'm not sure I'll bet this race, but in the horizontals 249.
Yeah, in Rage, he also has that 82 over the same course and nearly same distance at a big price from last fall. So if you can excuse recent efforts, there is reason.
I don't think you have to. That's my point. I don't think you have to. He's had a couple bad setups.
Yeah, absolutely. Nick, what about you? Where are you in here if you've had a chance to look at all?
Yeah, I thought that Electric Forest would be really tough to beat. I kind of drank the Kool-Aid after her debut, and my personal opinion on Bluegrass Day was that horses that made extended moves on the outside were at a disadvantage, and I felt like there were two horses actually who spent a lot of time on the outside that were victorious. Was on the whole card were Electric Forest and Good Magic, and so I think that really worked against her. No surprise that she ran well on debut, given that family. That's obviously the her dam, who was a crazy fast sprinter. Also is the dam of McLean's Music. So we know what he did on debut, getting the fastest debut speed figure in the history of Beyer speed figures. And so I thought she ran very, very well. I agree with Paul about Enrage. I don't think it was possible for anything else to go wrong last time. And she's clearly run races, especially at Churchill, going back to her second behind Me and Mischief, that will put her in the mix. And I think that being outside will certainly help her as well. You talked about Hold Her Tight in the La Troyenne or the 8 Bells, and Divine Mischief ran better than Hold Her Tight did last time. So I think that if you think that Hold Her Tight could be an off the pace, maybe underneath type, then you probably want to find a way to get Divine Mischief onto your ticket somewhere too, because she'll be a relatively decent price and comes off a race that was just as good as it looks on paper, if not better.
I like it. Let's move on to the 10th, the Grade 3 Edgewood 3-year-old fillies going a mile and a 16th. Nick, we'll keep it with you for your thoughts here.
Well, I mean, clearly what's done with Rushing Fall will make a determination on what happens here. I think that she was entered on Saturday just to see if maybe she got a better post position. I think she'll run here. Clearly she'll be a heavy favorite, but those of us who had the misfortune of betting on Daddy as a Legend last time are probably still going to be willing to take the opportunity to try and beat Rushing Fall with Daddy as a Legend. Rushing Fall has beaten Daddy as a Legend twice. Last time doesn't count. That was just, I could probably complain about that ride for an hour and a half, and nobody wants to hear that. Nobody wants to humor me in such a fashion. But needless to say, I'm happy about the jockey change. I think Daddy as a Legend is a talented horse. I think there is more than likely enough pace in here to set up her late run. And maybe I'm being overly critical, and I've been a big Rushing Fall fan, especially I made the I guess just what some people thought was the just ridiculous idea that Rushing Fall's Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies Turf was better than Lady Eli's Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies Turf. And if you want to get people going, then bring up Lady Eli. I thought Rushing Fall's Juvenile Fillies Turf was sensational, but I thought last time she was just okay. Looking at a horse like Significant Form for Chad, who exploded in her first start as a 3-year-old, albeit with a good setup and a good trip. Rushing Fall was just sort of routine, and maybe that's because she's one of those that makes it look easy. But I would be willing to try another horse that might offer a little bit more value in the multis. And so I'll use both Daddy as a Legend and Toinette, who I thought Toinette's race at Keeneland last time was very good. And she'll be forwardly placed, and that will probably help her cause all in all. And I have to bet, I mean, any person who considers themselves a trip handicapper is betting Daddy as a Legend in this race, because that was the biggest nightmare you'll ever find.
Daddy is a Legend and Rushing Fall just leapt off for me. Nick, taking shots at Lady Eli's undisputed greatness. Next thing you know, he's going to be lobbing grenades at the Chromies on the podcast, getting us all kinds of hate tweets. Paul, what did you think of this one?
Well, I think it's probably just the two horses, Daddy's a Legend and Rushing Fall. But the only wise guy horse I could come up with is maybe Got Stormy on the inside. Really got hurt by the pace in her last race, and I know she didn't finish as well, but got good workout sense, and maybe get a better trip this time. Definitely going to get more of an honest pace. So, but I'm not sure she's as good as the two big fillies.
JK, do you have any more creativity in here?
No, I think Daddy's Legend is going to be tough. If you noticed, there wasn't a ton of works. There's only 3 works kind of, leading up to that last race. So I'm not sure how long George actually even had the horse. Obviously, I think they probably gave her a little bit of a break. So she was probably at the farm. He only had a couple of works, and she ran as good as she did. I like to rub my face in chalk as often as possible. But I think there's a real potential for Daddy as a Legend to get a better trip than Rushing Fall and to turn the tables on her here. I kind of agree with Paul. I think in multi-race bets, I'm going to try to get cute and just use 2, not fall for the trap of any of these long shots.
Would you use them equally, JK, or would you press Daddy as a Legend for value, press Rushing Fall for equity because she'll be shorter? What would be your percentage allocation between the two in your horizontals?
Yeah, I think I'd probably just do it 50-50 because obviously I'm leaning to Daddy as a Legend. She's going to be a bigger price, so that kind of makes that up. I don't want to get upside down by pressing Rushing Fall too much or pressing Daddy as a Legend, then Rushing Fall wins by 3, and then I'll probably just go 50-50 there and try to get a little bit more equitable in other spots.
All right, let's go ahead and talk about the Kentucky Oaks. I'm gonna make a note. I'm gonna talk to the production team since we didn't start on the hour. I want to capture, if you can easily enough, guys, the timestamp of this segment so we can put it in the little Twitter description. I know many horse players super busy this week may want to jump right to the discussion of the Kentucky Oaks, and then the discussion we'll have after this, a quick discussion with our guests of the Kentucky Derby. JK and I will be back tomorrow with Mike Maloney to do the deep dive on this show on the Derby. But now it's time for the deep dive on this year's Kentucky Oaks. Nick, we're going to start with your thoughts.
Yeah, there was the Kentucky Derby draw was really much ado about nothing. I guess the only thing that happened at a post position draw, other than a million people tweeting about it afterwards of the week, was Monomoy Girl drawing the 14, which I don't think it's a huge problem, but I do think that for anybody who maybe had some interest in being against Monomoy Girl, it'll pique your interest a little bit more because it might make her job that much more difficult. She's clearly a very, very talented horse. Look, the Ashland was served up to her on a silver platter, and it's not because she needed those circumstances, but because those circumstances simply existed. There was no speed whatsoever in the race, and Florent Giroux was very, very smart to take advantage of that and go to the front and try and establish the tempo, which he did. She won't have the luxury of that trip again, but do you really think that Monomoy Girl will be beaten by maybe an outside stalking trip like the one she figures to get? I was admittedly unfamiliar with Midnight Bassoux prior to the last week or so, and was very impressed by the races that she's run. Her last was a race where, if you're looking at the chart, you have to be a little bit taken by the fact that she really came over the top of that field, encircling them around the turn and going on with it. This will actually be Bill Sparr's first starter outside of California in at least the last 5 years. And for anybody who can go farther back that wants to tell me, let me know, because I'm guessing it's been quite some time. She's certainly earned her way onto the travel team. The horse that I'm going to kind of focus my attention on wagering-wise intra-race is Eskimo Kisses, and I'm just going to hope that the pace gets quick and she makes that one run. The Oaks is a race that has had a little bit more of a collapse type of occurrence than the Derby has, I think, especially in recent years, and that has a lot to do with the fact that there's there's usually some one-way speed that really can't make it. So I was kind of rooting for Amy's Challenge to go here. Even without her here, I think between Classy Act and a lot of the other speeds, Take Charge Paula, Heaven Has My Nikki, I think will be somewhat forwardly placed. Monomoy Girl, clearly from the outside. I think you're going to get a strong tempo, and I'm hopeful that Eskimo Kisses, who I thought ran a very, very good second in the Ashland, given the pace in that race and the fact that she made a prolonged wide move around the turn. Granted, while inside earlier in the race, I thought that was something that you could kind of upgrade, and Corey Lannery going 2 turns on the dirt at Churchill is always a good thing. So I figured that you could do worse than to take a chance on her at 15-1 or so. And in terms of any multis that go through the Oaks Woodford Derby Pick 3 or the Oaks Derby Daily Double, I won't go out of my way to not use either Midnight Basoo or Monomoy Girl, especially into some price horses in the Derby, because they're just the 2 likeliest winners by far.
Paul, I've learned so much about the concept of race design, seeing races in your head before they're run on the track from both you and your brother Duke. I don't know if you've had the opportunity to do the 100% job on this year's Kentucky Oaks yet, but I wanted to get your thoughts in terms of race design, if you had any at the ready.
Well, that's what I was going to go there anyway, because I actually think the post is a good one for Monomoy Girl. As long as something doesn't go wrong at the break, I think it's going to play out perfectly for her. I think the Calhoun horse there on the inside and Rhea and Take George Parla are all going to go. And I think she's going to fall right off of those 3 horses, which is probably right where she wants to be anyway. And it's going to give her a little, as long as she breaks fine, I think it'll be perfect for her. I think the interesting thing about, I'm going to piggyback on what Nick said about Eskimo Kisses. I think she's the wild card in the race. I don't have anything really against the 2 favorites, except for both of them had ideal pace scenarios in their last races. So if you want to get real technical and you want to be against horses that have had good setups, I mean, both of them, I mean, you couldn't have better setups than both of them had, but they both responded and won easy, and they're clearly the 2 best horses on paper and have the highest figures. But I think Eskimo Kisses is the horse that could go forward. What we talked about, the weather might be interesting with Eskimo Kisses as well, because in her race at Oaklawn, she definitely freaked in the slop, and she's also getting Lasix back on, and she's I like the horses like her that improve with every start, especially for a trainer like McPeak, who doesn't have them cranked right from the get-go. I expect her to run a good race, Eskimo Kisses. Whether it's good enough to beat the two big fillies, I'm not sure. But if you can get anywhere near that 15-1, it's worth. It might be worth it. So I think it's probably a pretty formful race, but maybe Eskimo Kisses can be the one that can beat the 2 big favorites.
I see the race similarly to our 2 guests, and I'll be doing a whole segment on how I'm thinking about betting it on this week's Oaks edition of Out of the Gate. Essentially, it's going to be a double key with the 2 favorites. I don't see a reason why they won't both run in the top 4, if not the top 3. And I'll try to take the fact that I don't have a particularly creative handicapping opinion and try to use a creative way to bet the race, mixing in some price horses to attempt to get a little bit of money out of it. JK, how do you see this one?
I want to be alive to 4 horses that I think cover every scenario, right? So I want to be alive to Classy Act, who if for whatever reason the other ones happen to take back, I mean, I don't think that's going to happen with Take Charge Paula adding the blinkers, but if Classy Act happens to get loose, her last 2 races were fast paces, so you definitely want to upgrade those 2 performances. She was only, 2.5 lengths away from Monomoy Girl 2 back. I don't want to play the 6 degrees of separation move, but I think she's one that could be dangerous with at least a good trip from the inside, saving ground. I want to be alive to Midnight Basoo, obviously, is the best closer in the race, probably the most talented, running the fastest numbers. I want to be alive to Monomoy Girl if she happens to get the ideal trip that Paul mentioned. And then also Eskimo Kisses, which is that typical closing into slow paces. If you acknowledge that Monomoy Girl had things her way in the Ashland, you have to acknowledge that Eskimo Kisses did not have things her way. And I would think that she could improve. I love the fact that she's drawn outside. She's going to be ignored, and Corey's still going to find a way to get to the rail, save ground, make one run if they go too fast in front of her. I think she could be dangerous. So my goal is to be alive to those 4 in the picks. and try to find a way to be, have some good equity going into them and try to be efficient into those situations and hope that I can get out with a little bit of a score.
When JK talks about betting efficiently, he's talking about weighting combinations so that the horses who are going to be shorter in the market end up in higher denominations on his tickets, so he wins approximately the same, whether or not a 2-to-1 shot wins the race or a 10-to-1 shot wins the race. Am I summing that up correctly, Jonathan?
You did so very well, Peter.
That's why I get the medium-sized bucks, JK. Let's take a quick look ahead to the pay leg in the Oaks Derby double, the Kentucky Derby itself. JK, we're going to save your thoughts on this because we're going to be doing the whole race tomorrow. I just want to get our guests' quick thoughts on the Derby for this year, and then what I'd like to do is go to some questions. We've had several excellent questions, some specifically for Paul and Nick, that I'd like to get to in the 10 minutes or so that we have left on the show. Nick, it sounded to me like you maybe tipped your hand a little bit when talking about the Bluegrass Day and how you saw the racetrack playing on Bluegrass Day. Am I correct that Good Magic is going to be on many of your tickets?
Yeah, he is. I've wrestled with whether I wanted to do that or not for too long, and ultimately came to the conclusion that this is the kind of horse that at 6:45 or so, after I've probably done my errand duty and gone and grabbed Travis a beer, who would I be cursing about having won the Derby that I overlooked? And Good Magic is just coming into the race the right way. I think this has always been the design. He certainly worked backwards from there, so he's a horse that I'll use prominently. I feel similarly about Justify. I don't have any reservations about whether Justify is good enough. I don't see how anybody could, and I think he's the horse to beat without question. This is a horse with just an immense amount of talent, but you do have to have some concern for what exactly it is in terms of the challenge and whether he's going to be up to that portion of it. He's not only facing horses that are a lot better in terms of depth and quality, but he's facing a bigger field where the circumstances might not be as ideal, and so a number of things can happen that might put him in a difficult spot. Boldoro and Good Magic are kind of going to be the two horses that I focus on. I feel like Boldoro is the kind of horse that a lot of people whose opinions I generally agree with are gravitating towards, because he was probably most compromised in running behind Justify the way he had to last time. There are the obvious concerns, right? Is Mick Ruiz the type of guy that is going to get this horse to peak at the right time? And is Victor Espinosa a good fit? Despite his great Derby record, it's always been with a more forwardly placed type, and that's generally been his comfort zone. But I think he's going to come up off his 8-to-1 morning line, and I think that he'll offer enough value for me to go ahead and take a swing there. I would let Paul talk about Mendelssohn, because honestly I feel like my Mendelssohn opinion is it's not good and it's not concrete, because I really have no idea how to approach him at all. I feel as if he was aided by a strong inside bias at Maidan last time, but he unquestionably took to the dirt very well and is a horse with a great amount of talent. So I don't know if you're risking maybe being a complete fool in tossing a horse like Mendelssohn, because when push comes to shove, he might just be that good, and might be good enough to be a real contender regardless of all of the obvious things that are going against him. One horse that I'll say that's going to be a way bigger price than he should be, might not be good enough to win, but I think is certainly good enough to hang on for a piece, maybe a la Battle of Midway. You hear nobody talking about Noble Indy whatsoever, and I don't think that drawing the 19 especially with a jockey who's comfortable outside stalking is a bad thing. That's a horse I think that could really hang in there and maybe grab a share of it at 25 or 30-1, because he's an improving horse with, I think, the ability to go long without an issue, and I thought his Louisiana Derby was by far and away the most overlooked prep.
All right, lots of good thoughts there from Nick. I want to ask you about Mendelssohn specifically, as Nick indicated, Paul. I have a lot of friends who make figures for overseas races, and I have seen the Beyer Speed figure team came back with a 106 estimate on that figure. I had one friend who makes figures suggest it should be more like a 112, another a 115, and then I have my outlier guy who admitted that he doesn't make money betting off his Dubai figures, so take it with a grain of salt, but had him up in the 120s. Was curious, as a speed figure maker, what you thought of where, you don't have to name what you came up with if you made a figure, but where along that range you fall. And also, as someone who understands bias as well as you do, Paul, how much you downgrade whatever raw figure you give him for the fact that the inside that day sure looked like a paved highway.
Well, I think I'll just start with the figure. I have it faster than what Andy had. I'm going off of charts that I made basically off two horses that I thought were easy to do. Lonnie and California Chrome, when they ran in the race a few years ago, both of them pretty much ran the same figure every time they ran. So I kind of geared the chart towards them. I think it worked last year. I thought Thunder Snow was faster than everybody else had predicted, and I think that he was as fast as I thought he was, and actually proved that he probably was the best horse that was in the Derby last year, ultimately. So I have it very fast. With that said, like you said, it was a bias that I obviously don't think that was the reason why Mendelssohn won. He was going to win that race, didn't matter what. It could have been a dead race, and he was going to win the race. It probably got exaggerated. I would be surprised if he's going to, he would match that figure. But I do think he's the most likely winner of the Derby this year. I've gone back and looked at these Aidan O'Brien. Aidan O'Brien in some of these other dirt races takes the idea that he just takes a wild shot in him. In the Kentucky Derby, he hasn't taken that premise. If you go back and look at Master of Hounds or Lines of Battle or some of these other horses that he brought, you could arguably say that the best race he's ever run was the Kentucky Derby. So I think Mendelssohn's going to run his race. What I'm a little skeptical about Mendelssohn is that he's got a very similar style to Justify. I mean, I think they're both brilliant horses with big turns of foot. I mean, if you watch the UAE Derby, the way he quickened away from the field into the turn was extremely impressive. You don't see that very often with many horses, even at the elite level. But I think that Justify and him are going to have to be similarly placed and similarly hooked up. And I actually had a different take from this draw that I think going into the race, I thought everybody was going to kind of just let Promise Fulfilled go out there and everybody was going to just sit back off him. I think the horses on the outside have to go now. I think Mendelssohn being in 14, the European mindset is they're not happy sitting 4 wide. So they're going to go. I don't think they're going to see that they can get inside from going back. I think they're going to go forward. I think they have a fast horse, and this has been the goal all along, and I don't think they'd be happy with just riding cold and saying, we spent 2 years to try to win the Derby and then rode that way. So I just don't think they're going to do that. I think they're going to go forward. They're going to be aggressive. There's been the argument that Justify can sit, but I don't. Bob Baffert has never had that when he thinks he's got the best horse. That's never, and Mike Smith doesn't have that mindset either. That's why they get along. So I think they got to go. I think Noble Indy is a very good horse and possibly the fastest horse. And with Todd having all these horses in there, I can't see how he's going to sit. He's got to go. I think horses like Entice might be the fastest horse, which in the first half mile, and he's going to go. Victor Espinosa doesn't want to be behind horses ever. I mean, I think that this is going to be an aggressively paced run race. And even Magnum Moon, I think, is going to, being in 16, is going to go forward. So I'm expecting a lot faster pace than what I had originally forecasted.
Who do you think the race will be run to suit under that scenario, Paul?
Well, the horse that I'm coming on, I've had some difficulty with this Derby because I'm sure everybody has, that we have never seen pace scenarios for the lead up to the Derby like we have in this race. The Arkansas Derby was such a slow-paced race that I calculated that like Lawyer Ron would be 18 lengths in front of Magnum Moon. If they had run the same race. Justified the pace that he had in the Santa Anita Derby was the slowest Santa Anita Derby I've had, not counting the Polytrack era in California. And conversely, the Wood Memorial and the Florida Derby, how can anybody that set off those paces expect to have, even if I'm saying that the pace scenario is going to be fast, it's not going to be 21-4 fast. So there's no horses that I think are that you can move forward off of anything. I think you got a bunch of horses that are probably going to regress off their figures a little bit, because of the pace scenario. So I've been trying to find a horse that's going to move forward, and the one that I'm coming up with is Lone Sailor, and I think he's going to sit in perfect in the race. I really like the way he's worked since he's been there. He runs good in the turn. I think the race in the Louisiana Derby is better than what everybody's first impressions were. I didn't love the rail that day on Louisiana Derby Day. Everybody said he got a perfect trip, but he was on the inside for most of it, which may have counted to why he kind of flattened out towards the end of the race. I think he's got a great chance to move forward, and if he's probably not as talented. I know he's probably not as talented as Justify and Mendelssohn, but it could be one of these scenarios where he just could fall into his lap.
He's going to be a massive price, that's for sure, Paul. What would your guess be?
Well, I don't think he's going to be quite his morning line. So I'm going to guess between 30 and 40, somewhere in there.
Little 66 available in the overseas markets. We have plenty of listeners from the UK and Ireland who might want to take advantage of that before, if it's going to come in a little bit. Nick, before JK asks the next question, I know you have some time commitments. Do you have time to stick around, or should we cut you loose and catch up with you soon?
No, I'm good. I'll stay.
Awesome. JK, go ahead.
Yeah, so I got two questions for each of you guys, and I'll let you just hit them first. Who is your horse that will be bet in the Derby? And you guys know what I mean by bet, but who will be bet in the Derby that you're completely against, and maybe an undercard spot on Saturday that you're excited about? I know that I'm sure you've glanced, so maybe a horse you're excited about on the undercard on Saturday.
Go ahead, Paul.
Oh, you want me? Okay, I'm sorry. I didn't know if you want to start with me.
JK didn't ask. He's
no,
an amateur host. He's learning.
JK's not an amateur in anything. The horse I think is going to be over bet, and it's not that I'm totally against him, but I just think he's going to be bet more than his odds are going to be as good Magic. He's coming out of what I have the slowest prep, the Bluegrass. He beat Flame Away by a length and a half. He lost the Promise of Fulfilled before that. I don't have that race, the second race, being a big improve. I hear the argument that his best race was third off the layoff last year, and I'm sure that's kind of been their plan this year. So I'm not totally dismissive of him that he could move up third off the layoff and move up. But I do think there's a good possibility he's going to be the second favorite in the race. He's short on. He's a big favorite over Magnum Moon in the props out in Las Vegas. I think everybody loves betting Chad Brown in the United States, and I think he's going to be much lower odds than his actual chances of winning. That's that first question. The second question is on the earlier part of the card. I really like Mississippi in the Pat Day Mile. I think he's a classic cutback horse. He was kind of too close to the pace in the audible race. He's coming out of a real fast figure. The race doesn't have any killers in it. I haven't done all the work on that race. I know Restoring Hope is cutting back, and he's coming out of the wood. But I know I like Mississippi in that race. I think he's going to. I think he improved last time with the blinkers, even though the figures, maybe on some figure services, you might not see that improvement. I think internally, if you watch the race, you know that he was better with the blinkers. And I also think that the Todd Pletcher filly in the filly sprint race is really interesting. The one that he just the Humana Distaff.
Ivy Bell.
Yeah, Ivy Bell. I think she ran really good She won without the trip first time for Todd, and I think she's going to get a really good setup in that race. And she might be overlooked. I know it's Todd, but she might be overlooked a little bit in there too.
Nick, your thoughts on those two questions? A horse you're looking to oppose in the Derby, who's going to take some money, and some spot thoughts on Saturday.
Yeah, I would have answered this with great fervor probably a week or 10 days ago, but the horse that I would answer, I feel like people have already determined can't win. I would have said Magnum Moon, and I feel like everywhere you look, nobody is even acknowledging that Magnum Moon is in the race. So his price seems to be drifting. I don't know exactly why, but I can tell you that if he had been a single-digit price, which I'm beginning to wonder if he's not even going to be that. This is a little bit. It's probably not going to be as extreme. This is a little bit like when Outwork showed up on the first go-round of odds in 2016 at 25-1, and you wondered if there was some kind of story that only some people had heard, but because you're not hearing anything really at all. I understand what Paul's saying. A Good Magic, and Good Magic could end up being a bit of an underlay. But I also agree with a lot of the horses who received favorable setups in their preps and probably not wanting to really go after too many of them. I think Vino Rosso kind of qualifies under that. I get the feeling that Vino Rosso is going to make a very brief move at some point in this race and then immediately be routed for June 9th, and he feels like a horse at a mile and a half could really fit. So that would be where I'd go in terms of horses that I'd be against at short prices. I'm not against Audible. I know there are probably some people who are. I know that the label on him is that he got a favorable setup in the Florida Derby. I thought he actually did a little bit more running in the middle of that race than he's getting credit for. I also think he's likely to get a similar setup this time around. So I don't want to take a hardline stance against him. I will admit that I would have said that Mississippi as well in the Pat Day Mile. I think anybody who considers pace to be important, and if you're ever talking to people about racing, you should talk to people who think pace is important. Anybody who feels that way would want to bet Mississippi in his next start, given the pace that he chased. It looks like the pace in this race should really be fast. I don't know. I guess the horse is pronounced Gravitas. That's how Kurt Becker pronounced it. He feels like a horse to me that you can easily bet as well, that took this really difficult race off the layoff and now goes second off the layoff with a good outside post. He feels like one that you can really give a lot of consideration to as well. And it's not possible that Yoshida is going to be 15-1. I would think in the whatever this race is called now, the Turf Classic. I know Beach Patrol is a deserving, pretty heavy favorite off the layoff, but you'd have to give Yoshida a little bit of consideration at 15-1. So those are kind of the ones that I'm looking forward to the most. I agree with Ivy Bell in the Humana Distaff. My concern is it looks like there's no speed in there at all, other than the bookends. And I think American Gal being outside of Finley's Lucky Charm is going to help her a ton. I actually thought that the overly aggressive ride on her last time probably hurt her chances. I don't want to be hypocritical in saying earlier that I felt like the inside paths were better on Bluegrass Day. Why would I take a horse who spent the majority of her last start towards the inside? I just think she's going to be in a much better spot this time. So second off the layoff, if her price drifts up a little bit, then I could see myself landing there, because any race where Lewis Bay, who is just the equine chandelier, is going to find a way to favoritism, you have to be looking forward to betting that. I mean, Lewis Bay's loss last time, being outside or not, belongs in a time capsule of the most one of unbelievable defeats. This was a horse who looked like she was 1-20 at the quarter pole and still found a way to lose. So,
the Old Forester Turf Classic is the spot where Yoshida will be, with Woodford Reserve having upgraded to the title sponsors of the big race. I pay attention to this title sponsorship stuff when it comes to the booze brands. All right, we're over time. I have one quick question for each of you, because they came in specifically for you guys. So we'll try to hit these quickly, and then we'll let everybody go home. Nick, we're going to start with you. This one comes from our friend Matt Scarlatta, he of the Ring Bet, JK, if you remember the Ring Bet that we had some fun with at the Breeders' Cup last year. And he says, and he's not sure about this, and I'm not sure if this is right, so we'll confirm it first, that he says, Nick, that he heard you on with Steve Bick, and you had made a comment about Audible potentially having the look of a Belmont horse. Does that have the ring of truth?
I guess what he exposed is that I'm going to gradually give out like 5 or 10 Belmont horses, and so then I can just say afterwards that I was right. So now, okay, so apparently now I've given out 2 Belmont horses, but yeah, I think I did say that at one point. Audible feels like that kind of steady, one-paced, grinding type that works at Belmont.
And so it's more of a visual analysis from watching the races. He said he's heard other people say the pedigree experts seem to think that he might not go 10F. So he was curious where you came up with the idea for him for 12. But I imagine it's that sort of Todd, grindy running style that can often stretch out and keep clicking off 12s. Is that essentially the idea?
I think that's safe to say. I would also answer that question with something that was told to me by a horseman once, which you occasionally get a little bit of knowledge dropped on you. None of them are bred to go 10 furlongs, so right. It's a matter of who's going to get there the quickest. But and a lot of times these races end up being battles of attrition, so to speak. And so I'm not. Look, Audible's already outrun his pedigree, and I don't care really if he was out of a sprinty mare and buy into Mischief, who's probably, at least was 2 years ago, one of the most underrated stallions in the game. He's a horse that seems to have the ability to just keep grinding and keep going. And you look at a horse like Tappert, they seem to have that kind of style, that steady one-paced run.
Absolutely. All right. And Paul, the question for you, this one came from a listener, big Paul Matisse fan, who really likes and has been closely monitoring what he perceives as some added value in the pick 5 on Derby Day, the pick 5 that includes the Derby, I guess, as the pay leg. He was curious to get your thoughts if that's a pool that you have particular interest in, or what historically are your favorite wagering pools on Derby and Oaks Day.
Well, the pick 5 is relatively new on the Derby Day, so I'm old, so I kind of go back with some of these other ones. But obviously the pick 5 is a I don't have to get into the benefits of the pick 5 over some of these other bets. But the one thing I would be a little leery of on Derby Day is that you don't need all that extra value in the pick 5 especially if you're leaving yourself short, because the pick 5 is definitely a big bankroll bet. And so I'm always a little bit, to use a little Andy phrase, dubious about giving people the advice to play a pick 5, because if you're going to play pick 5, you better have a pretty big bankroll. I mean, that's why it's an advantage bet, So, but if you got tons of money and you're ready to fire, that's probably the best pool to be in. I wanted to make a comment too on the other question for Nick, because I didn't really talk about Audible at all. And
sure.
One of the things that I think what Nick is seeing with Audible that I've noticed is that he's really good in the straightaways, which is probably why Nick thinks he's going to be good at Belmont around 2 turns. But that may be a little bit of against him. If you watch some of his races, he's not great in the turns, and I think the Derby race is I'm not against him either. I think he's, I think he's a very credible horse, and his figures are right there with Justify on my figures, even though he's got good setups. But I'm a little worried about him in the turns. And the Derby's a race where if you can run in the turn, you're probably going to be in it. If you watch all these races, you always see those big moves in the second turn. Even if the horse is on the lead, it's they switch to the left lead and they take off in the turn, and then they kind of separate the horses that finish in the front versus the back, separate there. So I'm a little worried about that with him, because he seems to be more of a right lead horse than a left lead horse. So.
The stats bear out what you're saying too, Paul. If you look at the sort of average position of where horses are in the Derby, entering that turn, and then how close they are coming out of the turn, you really can see that numerically, that is where, it happens with a lot of races, but I think it's exaggerated in the Derby, where you don't see nearly as many wire winners, that horses that can run around the turn are the ones that typically, get to the wire first, as opposed to just the blazing front runners or, the occasional plotter.
Yeah, and even if you are a front runner, you're still going to have to be able to make that move. You get out in front. Horses like War Emblem, and I watched all these derbies last night, handicapping and Spend a Buck. They they still took off in the turn, just like all the other winners. I just think it's the nature. We don't see a lot of them anymore. I think it's the nature of 1 1/4 races, where the horses have this long straightaway to the turn, and then a relatively, in the way we look at races now, it's more proportional run down the backside, so that it's a kind of a different animal in modern day racing than what we see. I think everybody would kind of know this stuff if we saw more 1 1/4 races, but I think I think that's the reason why. I think that's more of the reason than being 20 horses or anything like that. If you take a look at a race like the Breeders' Cup Classic when it's at Churchill, with Blame and Zenyatta is one that comes to mind. Both of them, made these big moves into that turn. I just think it's a reflection of 1 1/4 racing, and I'm a little worried about that with Audible.
JK sheds a single tear, Paul, when you bring up the Blame Zenyatta Breeders' Cup Classic. All right.
Oh, yeah, but I pumped my fist.
That is all the time we have, gentlemen. I want to thank you, JK. Look forward to being back with you tomorrow with Mike Maloney for more Derby analysis. Check out DRF.com. I've got Jay Privman and Craig Milkowski tonight for a webinar. You can also catch the archive, drf.com/YouTube. Tomorrow, the great Andy Beyer and Mike Watchmaker will be joining for a webinar as well. But we'll be live tomorrow, Thursday, 11 Eastern, if you want to go ahead and tune in. I want to thank JK. I want to thank Nick Tammaro. I want to thank Paul Matisse. Most of all, I want to thank all of you for listening to this year's Oaks show. We will be back tomorrow. I'm Peter Thomas Fornatal. May you win all your photos.